Hi everyone, I'm Bree. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about small town romances. In my opinion, I feel like small town romances could absolutely be a subgenre of its own. I don't know if we're calling them that yet. I am a little bit biased towards small town romances. I grew up in a small Missouri town. I lived there from the time that I was born until about high school when I moved to Memphis, Tennessee. So early on in life, I had the best of both worlds. I knew what it was like to have that safety and security of living in a small town, but also know what it's like to experience that excitement of knowing you're moving to the big city where there's so many more things to do, so many more possibilities. Then as a young adult, I left home literally 3 weeks after I graduated high school and I joined the military, and I found myself in a small base located in a small town in South Korea, and I lived there for a year. I left there. I spent 7 years in a small town in Georgia, and now I am in a big city in South Texas. I have seen kind of the best of both worlds, and I definitely identify with those heroines who return home and start to ponder on like, what would life be like if I were to return back here? So kind of the gift and the curse that comes along with small town romances is everyone knows everyone's business, but I feel like explored correctly, this can definitely add to your story. Depending on your trope, if your trope is marriage of convenience, there's probably someone within that town that sees right through it. Or if the story is a romantic suspense, there's probably someone in the town who has a list narrowed down of all the people that had a grudge against the murder victim. So when I pick up a small town romance, I'm honestly in it just as much for the charm of the small town as I am the actual romance itself. I feel like certain authors do a wonderful, wonderful job of developing the small town just as much as they do the characters and the relationships between the characters. It goes far beyond just giving us a few business names and street names. Some authors are doing a wonderful job of painting the history of the small town. They're giving us like the principal income of the small town. They'll give us certain events that the small town looks forward to and different locations that people enjoy hanging out. When it comes to writing small town romances, authors are really stepping up their game in providing for us as readers what makes their small town different from the next small town. So one of the series that I want to highlight is one of the first series that I ever read. Prior to me reading romance, I was not a series person. I was definitely a one and done type of girl. There was nothing appealing about reading a series for me. But then I began reading romance and that totally changed. And one of the first series that I picked up was RAEANNE Thayne's Haven Point series, which kicks off with Snow Angel Cove. This is the romance between Eliza and Aiden, and Aiden is a CEO from Kane Tech, and Eliza is a single mom. She has lost her husband. I believe her husband committed suicide. I can't remember. But once she learns who Aiden is, this definitely causes some issues. But this is the perfect book, I feel like, for setting up the series that is going to be the Haven Point series. So Eliza is new to the town. She's never been to Haven Point before, but she has recently accepted a job offer there. When she gets there, that job opportunity kind of burns to the ground. But what I like what RAEANNE Thayne did with this book is we are experiencing Haven Point for the first time along with Eliza, who is also there for the first time. RAEANNE Thayne does a wonderful job of creating kind of the history of the town. We learn that Native Americans a very, very long time ago who lived in the area or roamed in the area felt like the area and the rivers and lakes that it had this ability to help heal people. Obviously through time that belief has kind of wavered off, but so much of this series focuses on healing. In each new book we see kind of a relationship or a marriage or a situation with kids. We meet someone who needs to be healed, and the town itself deals with some healing as well. So even though that belief kind of wavered off through the years, we see the townspeople of Haven Point slowly discover it with each new book. I became so sucked into this series because she just really depicts the townspeople and the town itself in such a way that it's just so easy to imagine yourself there. Haven Point is a small town in Idaho, and we learn a lot about like the economy. She writes into the story that the town used to be this big booming boat industry town, but when the town lost its boating business, the economy has really suffered, and that's where Aiden kind of comes into play. He's basically bought up like half of the town. This causes a lot of issues. Obviously people don't like change. People are really skeptical and hesitant because they don't know what he's going to bring to the town, and he himself starts to doubt himself a little bit, but he really does kind of have the town's best intentions in mind. So you have to continue on with the series to kind of see how this develops, but this book in particular just felt like a wonderful setup to the beginning of a new series, and I really have enjoyed what RAEANNE Thayne has done with the series. I'm not an author, but I definitely assume that it can get a little bit tough when it comes to writing a series series in a small town setting. On the outside, it looks like there's only so much you can do. She is still putting out books in this series. Like literally, I feel like there's been 2 books a year since I started the series. So I love when I pick up a small town romance and I like easily fall in love with all of the characters. There are some series that you just love everybody that you're introduced to and you keep your fingers crossed, like hoping that they'll get a book of their own. And that's kind of been the case with Maisie Yates's Gold Valley series. So the first book in this series that I picked up was actually the 4th book, and that is A Tall Dark Cowboy Christmas. I was sent this from the Harlequin publicity team last year around Christmas time, and I absolutely loved it. And this is between Grant Dodge and McKenna Dalton. And we learn in this book that McKenna is the long lost love child of the Dalton family, with another big prominent family in the town of Gold Valley. So I went back and I reread the previous books, and the entire like first half of this series follows Grant's family, the Dodges, and they're like this big family in Gold Valley. So then I was like, okay, well now I've met McKenna, I just kind of wondered, like, are we going to get more characters focused from the Dalton family? Read a little bit more, and I made my way to Cowboy to the Core, which follows the Dodge brothers' sister Jamie and her romance with Gabe. Yeah, Gabe. Her romance with Gabe Dalton. So I felt like this was really smart on Maisie Yates's part. We as readers have really grown to love this series and we're not really ready to let it go yet. So it's just kind of smart to kind of merge the families together, introduce different characters that are part of the Dalton family. I don't feel like so much emphasis is on the town itself. There's not really much mention of the town. Like we'll see the characters kind of out and about at bars and stuff like that. But you still know as you're reading that this is a small town setting, but so much more emphasis on this is on the families and itself and the issues that they have arise. But it's just wonderful. And I felt like kind of merging them together was a wonderful way to keep it in a small town setting, but have the series continue to go on. So kind of the typical what to expect when you pick up a small town romance. You're usually introduced to a heroine or sometimes a hero in the beginning who has left their small town behind and is now living in the big city. And they have so many endless possibilities within arm's reach or like a 45-minute drive. Everything that they want is possibly there. As the story unfolds, you kind of learn and understand that something is missing from their life. As we typically see happen, there is something that happens back home that drives the character to go back home. This is kind of the typical storyline that you see in small town romances. Sometimes they're just straight up set there, but for the most part, that is what I typically see, and those are kind of the stories that I prefer reading. So these are some of the books that I've read that I've really enjoyed, kind of the heroine having to return home. Huron's Landing, which is book 1 in Joanne Ross's Honeymoon Harbor series, and this follows Brianna. And when we meet Brianna, she lives in Las Vegas. She's working for this big hotel company, and she was literally just doing her job, but someone took what she did the wrong way and put in a plate, and her boss is like, you know, you need to write an apology letter, and she's like, screw that, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I was literally just doing my job. You know, one of those like, you don't have my back, I'm over it kind of things. And she just pretty much decides right then and there, I'm going home. So she returns home to Honeymoon Harbor. I believe this takes place in Washington State. It's when she gets back home and she gets settled in that she links back up with her crush from childhood named Seth. She didn't really get to pursue it because he ended up marrying her best friend, who unfortunately passed away while serving on deployment in the army. Once she's back home, that she realizes she has been kind of serving others for so much of her life, but it's time that she actually chase her own dreams. And I felt like this was a wonderful example of going home and kind of starting all over again. And then you move on to book 2, which is Snowfall on Lighthouse Lane. This is the romance between Jolene and Aiden. And Jolene was a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. She's really close to her mother, and she lives in Hollywood. She's this big makeup artist for the stars. And then her mother reaches out to her and lets her know that she's had this cancer scare. And so Jolene's like, obviously I'm going to go home. So she goes home to be with her mom. I loved her relationship with her mother. Aiden was once upon a time the town bad boy who after high school left for the Marines, served a couple of tours, and is now home and is serving as the possible police chief. And what I really like with this one is I really like when a small town romance kind of uses local legend and lore to help you understand the characters a little bit more. Aiden obviously having been the town bad boy, and now he's in this like law enforcement role. There are people who still remember kind of the crappy things that he did as a kid and still hold those things against him, and are making it definitely difficult for him in his new position as police chief. Another author who I've read small town romances for and adored is Susan Wiggs, Map of the Heart. And I first saw this on Sarah from Steeped in Books channel. She mentioned it a while ago and I picked it up, and this follows another widow, and her name is Camille, and she lives in this small coastal town, and then she gets this package that basically like shatters shatters everything family history wise that she's known. So her daughter, and Camille's father, they travel to his hometown, which is a small town in France. And I just loved kind of the representation of like going home and meeting family that are like people that you are blood related to, but you have never crossed paths with before. Learning history and learning secrets and just learning that things could have been totally different than what they turned out to be. It was so beautiful. I loved this book so much. And then she did a wonderful job with Family Tree. So in Family Tree, we follow Annie, and at the beginning of this book, kind of off the page, she suffers a really terrible accident, and her douchebag fiance, like while she's unconscious, basically flies her out to Vermont, to that small town that her family lives in. And it's while there that she kind of reconnects with herself, and her memories very slowly start to come back. And obviously she's back home. This like opens the doors for old loves, and it was just so beautiful. Like Susan Wiggs is definitely an author that I'm keeping my eye out for, but I just really enjoyed kind of her spin on the whole heroine returning home to her small town trope. I really love what Debbie Macomber did with the Cottage by the Sea. This book is so beautiful. It is heartbreaking. It is so hard, and it's like right from the beginning it is difficult. And our heroine in this one is Annie, and at the beginning she basically loses like all of her immediate family. So she returns to the cottage that they used to rent when she was a kid. They kind of stopped going as she got older, but she just remembers it being a place that she was always happy. After the tragedy happens, she rents the cottage, and this is her romance with a local named Keaton. And we see her really build and create this kind of safe haven for herself after the tragedy that's happened. And we really start to see her make these like strides to getting better and like moving on with her life, and it's beautiful. And then an opportunity presents itself that just she absolutely should not pass up, but at the same time, if she takes that opportunity, she's leaving this life that she's now built behind, and it's just so wonderful. Like, I know Debbie Macomber isn't necessarily for everyone, but I thought this was absolutely beautiful. And it was like heroine never lived in this small town. It was just a place that she went with her family, and this cottage represented like a happy space for her. So some of the things that I like to see, I really love when we have amazing side characters. I love seeing some of the kind of hilariousness and drama that the side characters can bring, but I also think it's important for authors to like remember that this is a romance at the core, and we want to see that romance kind of develop between the two main characters. So for the most part, I have seen some instances, which I've been guilty of, where I'm like, I want more of this character, so I just have to hope that they get their own book. But for the most part, I think authors do a really good job of like balancing like how much we get of the side characters and keeping the focus on the romance. There's just something about small town romance and nature that just works so well, and I especially love this during holiday romances. Laws and Christmas by Rachel Bloom. And all I'm going to say is I read a ton of holiday romances this year, but this one was kind of like the standard. And crazy, this was like the last holiday romance that I read. So while I was kind of beating myself up for not having read it sooner, I was kind of like, you know what, at the same time, I really did save the best for last, because the descriptions of nature, the descriptions of like, this book transported me to a small town in the winter. And that's all I really wanted from the holiday romances that I was reading this year. Just the beautiful descriptions of snow, the ice on the lake where everybody went ice skating, all of the details that she put into capturing this romance, the community amongst the people and the town itself were just absolutely beautiful. Another thing that I like is when authors take kind of that expectation of small and cozy and safe and security and flip it upside down. With Devney Perry's The Jameson Valley series, I remember picking up book 1, which was the COPPERSMITH farmhouse, and I was like, perfect, it's going to be a small town Montana romance. And then this book took a dark twist that I was not expecting. And while I was, at first I was taken aback a little bit, like, dang, I was really wanting something sweet and cozy, also kind of reiterated and reminded me that even in small towns, those back roads, those small houses that you pass by every day, you never know what's actually going on. I feel like with small town romances, the tropes that you can use really are endless. And I also feel like small town romance really mixes well with other subgenres. So for example, The Demon Lover by Juliet Dark. This is book 1 in her Fairwick Chronicles series. My first time reading it, I was not really a fan of it. And my second time reading it, I was like, I don't know. But over time, this book has really grown on me. So this follows Callie, and she's a professor, and she takes this job in upstate New York to work at this local university in this small college town in their folklore department. And she is totally fascinated with kind of the intersection between lurid fairy tales and gothic literature. And really, when you get into this book, it's kind of one of those fate things, like you were meant to come here. But she gets there, and we learn very early early on that Callie, like all her life, since she was a kid really, I don't remember, I think something happened, it's kind of blurry. She started having these dreams of like this prince. And then as she gets older, the dreams become very, very vivid. And like once she's back in this town, it's like very real life. And he's basically an incubus. And once she's settled in, she's bought her house, she's actually teaching now, she starts to learn that like her incubus is not the only mythical creature in this town. And I could totally see this being a story that works well in like the big city, but there was just something about this quaint New England town that's really cozy and comfortable. Everybody seems cool. And then you just learn that like things are absolutely not what they seem. While I could see the story working in like the big city, it just worked perfectly in the small town setting. So while I love a small town romance, I definitely pay attention to the reasons that people don't enjoy them. And some of the reasons are like people just feel like they kind of give this candy-coated escape. Each his own. Honestly, I don't go necessarily seeking small town romances anymore, but if I pick up a romance, because I'm very much a mood reader, so I just pick up a book. If I pick up a book and I learn that it's a small town, I get really excited because I do live in the big city, so it provides an escape for me from like my everyday reality. And then the whole idea of like the heroine dropping everything and returning home definitely bothers some people. I will say that this hasn't bothered me with actual romance novels, but I do love Hallmark movies, and especially their Christmas movies, and that was a trend that even I was becoming aware of. Like, why does the heroine always have to be the one that like drops everything and decides to like stay in this small town? But I did notice in a few of their 2019 holiday romances, it was a hero that actually went after the heroine. Like she would return home and then he would go to her. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that maybe this is a spin that we start to see in some of our actual like romance novels. So I would love to hear, if you are a fan of small town romances, what some of your favorites are. Share with me what it is you love about small town romances. And if you are not a fan of them, let's chat about it. What is it about them that you are not a fan of? And compared to the big city, what is it that works for you with those versus the small town? I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in my next video. Have a good day. Bye.
Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot.